I'll start off by saying that I have never believed in any of these sort of creatures, but I saw something in early 2009 that really disturbed me and is making me change my mind. I was not under the influence of any drugs, and I have better than average eyesight, and the lighting was near sunset, but I was still able to see clearly. So I'll get this underway and explain my story, and maybe someone can shed some light on this for me. I live in Fergus Falls, Minnesota, which is in west central Minnesota, about an hour drive from Fargo, North Dakota. And my mother-in-law lives out in the country, about 3-4 miles out of Fergus Falls, and I was staying there while my wife and her mother went shopping in town. They called me and asked if I wanted to go to a 7 p.m. movie showing. So I left the house at about 6:30 p.m. to 6:45 to meet them at the theater. About 2 miles from their house on a country road known as the Wendell Road along the Mistinka River, I saw 3 white-tailed deer. 2 of the deer were rather small, probably just yearlings, and a large doe, who I assumed was their mother. Me being an avid hunter and lover of wildlife, and future wildlife biologist, stopped to look at the deer. I should also mention that I hunt in the area and have spent my whole life in the Fergus Falls area. The deer were following a small creek bed, which is in fact the Mistinka River, so there were hardly any trees except for one. Maybe because I didn't see it there, because of the tree, but I just noticed something crouching behind the tree on my side of the road, looking at the deer, and to my belief, hunting them. It just sat there, looking at the deer, taking no notice of me, even though I was in my truck, no more than 40 yards away, with a clear view, with nothing obstructing my view of it. It had one hand on the tree that it was bracing itself with. What struck me as shocking was the fact that it seemed to be a 2-legged creature and not a 4-legged one. Its hands appeared to have opposable thumbs and were rather slender and long, very unlike a wolf. The creature looked as though if it stood upright, it would be over 7 feet tall, with a protruding muzzle, broad shoulders, a slender waist, thick, muscular thighs, and, being as there was snow on the ground, I couldn't see the feet. He was deep, dark brown in color, and throughout the body. After several seconds of looking at the creature in shock, the deer ran off, and then something amazing happened. It looked right at me, as though blaming me for losing his meal. He just sat there looking at me, and blinking but not moving. This scared the crap out of me, so I hit the gas pedal and drove off. It was very dark after the movie, so I didn't much feel like trudging through the 3.5 feet of snow with the possibility of a monster looking in the area, who is currently looking for a meal that I scared off. So at about 10 a.m., I went back there and walked down to the tree. Under the tree there was no snow, so there were no tracks that I could see, but leading up to the tree, there were 3 tracks leading in from my grandmother-in-law's field, which was hard, black dirt, and if you know what a Minnesota field looks like in late winter, early spring, you can't make anything out of the dirt. The tracks I did find were only about 6 to 7 inches in length, but were clearly canine prints with the exception of 4-toe-looking marks in the snow. Well, that's my story. If anyone has any information on this, let me know. First off, I would like to keep my name confidential, just for the fact that this happened on an Air Force base, and I don't know who reads this stuff. This happened sometime in September of '99. I forget the exact date. It was early in the month, though. I want to say between 2 and 3 a.m. to be exact. I was Security Forces airman working 3rd shift on base patrol. Now, mind you, this is an Air National Guard base that I worked at full-time. It's on the north side of Duluth, next to the International Airport. North to the northeast is nothing but large wooded areas, forest areas to be exact. 3rd shift on base was pretty boring, and this shift covered 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. And as full-timers worked a skeleton crew, and usually only 5 to 6 of us on 3rd shift. I was in the patrol truck doing my usual rounds, checking doors and fence lines. Late at night, on the north side of the base was usually creepy enough when patrolling by yourself. Anyway, I was on this road, driving towards our baseball field, when my headlights caught a pair of eyes reflecting back at me. They were almost eye level with me, and I was sitting in an F-150. Around this time, a few of the guys had been seeing this huge buck around the property, like a 16-pointer or something around that size. I was about 80 yards or so when I saw those eyes reflecting back at me. So I'm thinking it was a big deer at the time. I gotta see this thing. So I hit the gas and started speeding towards the field. And this is where it all happened so fast. It's almost hard to explain looking back. There was a little slope behind the baseball field. It sloped down, probably about 12, 15 feet give or take, into a brush line. The brush went about 30 feet and then turned into a thick tree line. The brush was probably armpit height of me and pretty tough to traverse through, being so thick and all. As I turned into the baseball field and turned the truck towards the thing, I just caught the rear end of the thing leaping down the slope, below the line of sight of my headlights. The thing was no more than about 20 feet ahead of me when it leaped. All I got a look at was the back end of the thing, and it was huge. The best I can do to describe it is to say that it was wolf, dog-like in nature. It had a long tail, longer than 2 feet actually. The hind legs looked exactly like that of a dog's, same with the back paws, but the paws were huge. They were bigger than my hands for sure. The hair was wavy, but yet matted and thick. The color was blondish or very light brown. I didn't notice any gray in it, but this happened all within about 2 to 3 seconds. I sat in my patrol truck for a couple of seconds, confused and thinking, I know what I saw, but it couldn't have been what I saw. So I hopped out with my flashlight and M16 rifle and walked to the edge of the slope. All I heard was the thing running through the woods in front of me, heading in a northwest direction. And this thing sounded like a moose charging through the trees. It made a lot of noise, and that's when I started to get really scared, thinking, if this is some sort of wolf or whatever it could be, my M16 isn't going to do a thing to this animal. So I jumped back into my patrol truck as fast as I could and headed back to the SF headquarters. I never told any of the other members about this for fear of ridicule or being called crazy. There's no way I misidentified this thing. I'm a trained observer, an avid hunter, and have worked with animal rehabilitation with the DNR in the past. I know my animals in the North Woods extremely well. I saw exactly what I saw, and that was the back end of a large wolf dog thing that basically had its eyes level with mine while I was in a patrol truck. The back end was definitely much larger than any of the largest deer or black bears I've seen. The points I remember the clearest were the tail and back paws, as well as the texture and color of the hair. This is my story. I have never told it to anyone until now in fear of ridicule. I swear on my life for it to be true. I'm a city girl at heart, so I don't know a thing about tracks. Last winter, I was at the cabin and saw prints in the snow next to the small creek near the frozen pond. The prints were a big circle with 3 smaller circles, and above the big circle, I wear a size 7 shoe, but wear a size 8 boot to provide room for extra socks. The print was bigger than my boot, which measures 11 inches long. I went home and looked on the internet to see what kind of print it was. After doing that, I decided it must have been a wolf. After I heard about Dogman a month or so ago, I checked the Wolf Center's website and discovered that wolf prints only get to be about 5.5 inches long. Since I don't know anything about tracks, I couldn't tell if it was a 2 or 4-legged creature that had left this track. Of course, at the time, the 2-legged possibility was the furthest thing from my mind. I told my friend about the tracks and that I thought they might have been Dogman tracks. Although he was my friend, he said he didn't believe in Dogman. He did say that a guy we went to high school with back in the 80s with whom my friend played music at the time said he had seen the devil in the woods when he was up north hunting. He said it had red eyes and stood on 2 legs, had a dog head and was huge and stared at him and then jumped across the gully he was in like it was nothing. One thing I forgot to mention is that I had a tough little Apso with me when I saw those tracks. He is usually a fearless dog, but he would not leave my side at all that weekend. I couldn't even get him to go outside the cabin alone to go to the bathroom. And also, my 300-pound brother is afraid of the cabin and won't go up there alone. He doesn't believe in Dogman or Bigfoot, but something about the place just makes him uneasy and creeps him out. I've gone up there alone, but rarely go outside after dark. Once in a while, I find myself finishing up in the sauna after dark and rush back to the cabin, which is about 100 yards away. I use an indoor bucket instead of the outhouse in the winter, and when the water is turned off, I'm going to make sure that I put curtains up on all the windows now that I've heard your shows. You're a great host. Thank you for providing this story. It was the summer of '97, and I was 13 years old at the time. I was rollerblading from a part of town called Old Cottage Grove. I guess I should start off by saying that the city where this happened was a suburb of St. Paul, Minnesota, called Cottage Grove. It was around 9:30 p.m. and I was rollerblading back home from a girlfriend's house with a friend. We were just coming around a bend in the road that went past a farm that I believe, at the time, was called Green Acres Farm. I'm not exactly sure what it was they did at that farm, but I do know for sure, at the time, there were always cattle of all different ages, sizes, genders, which brings me to the conclusion that maybe I was just at the right place at the wrong time. As I was rounding the bend in the road to start coming up the hill, I felt a very strong sense of fear. It was like my body was telling me to get the hell out of there, yet I couldn't figure out why. I can tell you this much though. For the first and only time in my life, I felt like I was no longer at the top of the food chain. Right when I started to pick up the pace to get out of there is when I heard the sound that came from the fenced-in cattle farm to my left, maybe 15 to 20 yards behind me. It sounded like nails grabbing a pole or fence, and then what sounded like what a dog's paws and claws sound like when walking or running on a tile floor, except this just sounded like a quick leap on the street's pavement. As I turned around to look, there stood what looked to be a weary or wiry gray-haired werewolf. It was like time had just stopped altogether. There was a street light at the time in the woods, maybe 5 feet behind it, so all I could make out was a silhouette of this monster. It had to be at least 7 feet tall, with the head of what looked like a German shepherd, with huge ears and a huge muzzle. I could see this thing was built like a bodybuilder too. It stood bipedal like a man and not like what some folks say, with these things having dog-like limbs. It had long, slim hands with black nails on its fingertips. It had a slim waist, but its upper body was muscular beyond belief. I mean, think Arnold Schwarzenegger back in the early 80s. The one thing that really stuck out to me and was out of place to me was that I could see this thing breathe as though it was winter. But mind you, it was the end of June, almost July actually. It looked as though it was smelling my scent, but that's just what it looked like. I'm not positive on that. But before I knew it, I was yelling to my friend to get the hell out of there and to not look back. But it's almost as though he was in another world because he didn't seem to feel, let alone see what I had just experienced. I'm somewhat of an artist and drew a picture of what I saw, which was a werewolf. Fast forward 17 years later, and I still hadn't told anyone about this encounter. This is until my oldest brother and I were trading stories one summer evening, and it just sort of came up as we were talking about Bigfoot. Mind you, my brother's a firm believer in this animal, so I said the heck with it and started telling him about what happened to me, going to the point of pulling out the original drawing I drew of it. To my surprise, he didn't look at me or laugh at me like I was positive he would have. Instead, he started asking me if I had ever heard of the Michigan Dogman or seen anything on it, which I replied no. He then pulled up an image on his internet of a sketch that an eyewitness had drawn, and I swear to you, it sent shivers down my spine. Because it not only looked like the drawing I had done, it looked exactly like the thing I saw that night. He then pulled up an image on the internet of a sketch that an eyewitness had drawn, and I swear to you, it sent shivers down my spine. Because it not only looked like my drawing, it looked exactly like the thing I saw that night, in the summer of 1997 in Old Cottage Grove, Minnesota. To this day, I still find myself trying to wrap my head around what I saw. I'm 33 years old now, yet still I find myself trying to rationalize what I crossed paths with that night. It feels good to get this out there and somewhat off my chest. I hope someone out there finds something helpful in this experience, and I hope this sort of thing never happens again to anyone. I should start off explaining that my partner and I are experienced Bigfoot investigators who are in a unique situation. As we have a family group living in our research area, Last October, during the full moon, my partner and I were on our hilltop having quite a bit of success with 2 juveniles and 1 adult. We could hear them walking in the leaf litter, and every once in a while we could also hear a clack or wood knock from different directions. After a while, it seemed that the feeling of fun for them dissipated and became a lot more cautious. Mike heard something to our north and went a ways down to investigate, while I stayed by the camp to make sure it wasn't a diversion. He came back in a rush and said he had seen one of the young ones come out of the woodline, running for the other side of the fire break, and what was following he said he couldn't comprehend. It was about 6 foot tall with pointy ears and a long snout. At this point, I have to say that neither of us given any creed to the Dogman, Wolfman, Grassman theory. We just thought it was a mistaken identification of a bigfoot or a bear. I had purchased a .40 caliber handgun and some hydro shock ammunition for it earlier that day, so it was in my vehicle. After Mike had explained what he had seen, I retrieved my weapon and loaded it fully. All the while, we could hear the 2 young ones chattering and the big ones stomping all to our backside. They were pissed or upset about something, and they never acted that way with us. I had Mike take me down the fire break to where he saw this creature, and with spotlights, we scanned the whole area. We could hear something moving around and a few short growls. Finally, Mike caught it with the spotlight, going between trees, and what I witnessed is something I would never have dreamed of seeing, except maybe on a movie screen. A 6-foot wolf walking on its hind legs. I fired my weapon in the air and it turned to the southeast, into the woods. We cautiously made our way back to camp, but we could hear this thing pacing us to our left. As we got back to camp, we kept listening to this thing approaching us from the woods. Mike turned on the spotlight and I leveled my gun wherever the sound was coming from. It was approaching us without fear, and it felt to both of us like it was stalking us, as if it was one of our juvies that Mike had witnessed. It came out from between the trees and I shot it square in the ribs at about 20 yards. We measured the next day and I am a very good shot. I saw the wound and know without a doubt I hit it. It fell to the ground, but immediately got up and ran to the southeast. We could hear it crash through the brush, and we even heard it fall down or trip over something, but it continued to head in pretty much a southerly direction down the hill, paralleling the fire break. We were both freaked out by this time and broke camp and left. The next morning, I loaded up a few extra clips and we went back up to see if it died somewhere close, or was just wounded. So we felt we had to track it down. We did track it from the point of where I shot it, all the way down the canyon, and even found where it made such a ruckus when it fell. The leaf litter was all upended and was fairly easy to track. At one point, we did find a perfect canine track in a mud ridge, but it was over 8 inches across. The thing that absolutely baffled both of us was that there was no blood trail. None! We both saw the bullet hit, but yet no blood? We tracked it all the way down the canyon until we lost the trail. We talked to a Native American couple we know, and they immediately said skinwalker. We contacted a few other investigators to try and figure out what in the hell happened. I mentioned before that neither of us took any creed from any Dogman reportings, but I do know that neither of us wants to experience it again, and I have never gone out in the woods unarmed since. I saw 3 of them, eating something big and bloody in a field. They saw me, stopped eating, and followed me back to the farm when I got out there. This happened more than 50 years ago. It was forbidden to talk about in the family, lest the neighbors think we were crackpots. Now, all the old folks are gone, and I've told my children about what I saw that day. They said I should write it down, but I think I'll leave that up to them to do. There were other strange things going on in the area, but at the time, we didn't connect them together. If the aunts and uncles didn't know what was going on, they wouldn't tell us kids. It's been cathartic to talk about, and I'm so pleased to see that others have seen them too. But I have to tell you, to think back on something I've tried to forget for over 50 years, it's terrible. It was so frightening, I haven't been able to get a good night's sleep. Thinking back on all that gore and those things' faces, I truly believe they would have eaten me if they hadn't already just eaten. When I finally told where and what had happened, I was called a balding-faced liar and given a good beating. Then the folks went to the field and to the truck that I hid in and saw the gore, blood, scratches, prints, and all. Later, an uncle up the road about 5 miles had these prints come up to his house. He took pictures of them, and there was a newspaper article about some sort of huge cat prowling around. I don't know if that has anything to do with these critters or not. A neighboring farm that was owned by a wealthy family, compared to us, had a prized bull go missing. I bet that had something to do with those things. He was a huge thing and very ornery. They never found a trace. I know this is choppy and not very clear, but it still makes me nervous to talk about after all this time. I was rolling the trash cans out for pickup the next day. It was late, so I grabbed a flashlight. I walked out the back door and unlocked the gate, and was dragging the can while walking backward. As I passed the fence, it blocked my view of my neighbor's garage, and that's when my light hit this wolf creature. I froze instantly. The creature was about 20 feet away, and I could clearly see that it was crouching. When our eyes met, it turned to its right and fell to all fours and leapt my neighbor's driveway in one jump. That driveway is about 12 feet wide. The creature was about 8 feet tall and maybe 300 pounds. It looked kind of thin around the waist, but it was very muscular. I dropped the trash can and panic set in. I ran inside, grabbed my gun, and locked myself in my room. I've never felt fear like that before. When the light hit its eyes, they were a vibrant yellow color, kind of like having its own glow. His fur was short and charcoal colored. I could hear the clicking of his claws when he dropped down on all fours. I thought I was seeing things. I didn't sleep a wink that night. It made me really question my sanity. Furthermore, it made me seek a concealed carry weapons permit. Just a few nights ago, I heard something whimpering. When it was just starting to get dark, I slammed my window shut and hit the lights. I laid in bed with my AR-15 that whole night. I'm probably the youngest person to come to you about this. I'm 16, grew up here in Montana, and am very active in the outdoors. When I was 4 or 5, I lived with my parents in a small town next to the highway. Our house was right next to it, and my room faced a gravel road that went into the highway. It was summer and we didn't have AC, so I would leave my window open at night so I could stay cool. One night, I woke up and noticed a silhouette standing outside my window. My eyes focused and I saw that it had a furry outline, and in these frost blue eyes it was using to look at me. I sat up in bed, frightened, but I didn't feel the need to yell for my parents or anything. It kind of just stared at me. While looking at it, I saw that it had pointed ears with tufts of fur, like lynx have, and a muzzle like a German shepherd. It was fairly muscular and was almost resting on my windowsill like it was leaning up against it. We stared at each other for a good couple of minutes. Then, it smiled at me like a dog does and even tilted its head. It then backed away from my window, walked across my yard to our chain link fence, and literally stepped over it. I got out of bed to watch this thing as it got down on all fours and ran down the road, and then across the highway. Listening, I heard its yip and bark while on the other side, which was a prairie with a butte and then forest. It was almost like it was calling the others. Looking back on this, I feel like maybe it felt like I didn't pose a threat. Maybe it was just curious. Back then, I was just a little kid. Now I'm a lot bigger. I'm 6'7" and weigh almost 200, so I'm thinking if I saw one of these again, I probably wouldn't get the same reaction. My brother and I were waiting for our bus at our usual corner stop. It's about 3 blocks away from our house, and there's a pretty densely wooded creek nearly 1 to 2 blocks behind our bus stop. The first thing I noticed that was off was that my brother was standing completely rigid, staring intently down the long road. The first thing I noticed that was off was that my brother was standing completely rigid, staring intently down the long road. There are only 2 streetlights and a few automatic porch lights down there. I shook him a little bit and asked what he was looking at. He shushed me almost immediately. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a large black shape darting on 2 legs across the street to the line of the houses on the other side before disappearing. Thankfully, our bus arrived soon afterward and we got the hell out of there. I grew up in a town called Hawthorne, located in Nevada. Hawthorne is located right next to Walker Lake. The main highway leading from Hawthorne to Reno is Highway 95, which if you use Google Earth, you can see runs right between Walker Lake and a mountain range. This creates a small area off the highway that is affectionately known to the locals as the Cliffs. When I was 14, my grandparents, mom, and I were coming home late from a long day of doctor's appointments in Reno. My grandfather was driving, and we hit the Cliffs a little after 11:30 p.m. I was in the passenger seat, and to help keeping my grandfather awake, but I still think it was just so I could sing folk songs with him. Anyway, about a third of the way around the Cliffs, heading toward Hawthorne, there is a small area where the road pulls away from the mountain and creates a small alcove area. As we started to come upon it, we saw a large animal crossing the road, dragging another animal in its mouth, and it stopped in this alcove. Grandpa thought at first that I might get my first look at a live mountain lion, so he slowed down. When we got within 100 feet of it, he turned on the brights of the car. To our surprise, it was no mountain lion. We only had a couple of seconds to look at it after Grandpa turned on the brights, because right after the light hit whatever that thing was, it turned to look at one of us. It turned to look at us 1 second, and then the next, it leapt straight up the side of the mountain and out of sight, leaving the mangled body of a fox. Grandpa hit the gas, and the old Buick we were in jumped, waking up the woman in the back seat. I had never seen my grandfather truly scared before, but even he was physically shaking afterwards. I remember the sheer bulk of the thing and the fact that it looked like a really large bodybuilder. When it jumped in the same fashion as a human, with its arms reaching up toward the rocks almost over its head, it had long, thick fur, but you could see the muscle definition pretty clearly. I don't remember any of the facial features, but I remember the pure terror when that thing turned and looked at the car with shining yellow eyes. I even pissed myself. I have come practically face to face with a polar bear, and I wasn't as scared as when we saw this thing. Now, I don't believe in werewolves, and I haven't seen anything like it since, but I hope I never, ever see this thing again. I was going through the hiking trails with my dog, behind my town's local high school, fairly late one night. I had gone there plenty of times before since I was young, so I wasn't frightened. While I was walking my dog, he kept trying to stop and kept whimpering, which was strange because he is normally a very brave dog. After walking for about 10 minutes or longer, I heard huge branches crashing and breaking, and that's when I started to become frightened and decided to turn back. While walking back, I could tell that something was following me. I was terrified. Suddenly, after a minute of calmness, this creature leaped out in front of me across the trail. The creature had long, dark fur and was enormous. It wasn't a bear, though. It was like a very muscular, huge wolf. After seeing this, I picked up my dog and sprinted off the trail without seeing it again. That was easily one of the most terrifying nights of my life. For some background info, I was raised in the deserts of southeast New Mexico on 2 different ranches, so I am very well versed in the flora and fauna of our beautiful state. I even used to track semi-professionally for hunters and our local trapper. I know the critters around this state. We always have lived on a very remote ranches, 50, sometimes 75 miles from the nearest actual town. My senior year of high school, I moved out on my own, being a part of the DECCA program to live close to my job and school. Living about 12 miles from Artesia, New Mexico, where my school and job were, seemed like living right in town after all that. I guess my story starts in April of 1999. My boyfriend and I were rooming with a couple in a trailer house just outside of Lakewood, New Mexico. We rented a room from them and sometimes watched their 2 kids as a part of our rental agreement. For a few weeks that April, a lot of the neighboring landowners had been complaining about wild dogs coming up from the river and harassing their dogs and scaring their livestock. We were about a mile from the Pecos River, and wild dogs have indeed been a problem in the area. One guy had even reported some structural damage to one of his chicken coops. The couple we lived with had 2 dogs, both of them medium-sized terrier mixes, and neither one of them were on the cowardly side. They had been getting very skittish about going outside at night, so much so that we had to make sure to let them out right at sunset and again at sunrise, because they would not leave the trailer house otherwise at night. Well, one Saturday night at about 11 p.m., and I know it was a Saturday because I had neither work or school. Near the end of the month, the four of us were sitting around watching TV, and I think just basically talking about stuff, when the dogs, who were asleep in the master bedroom, mind you, on the far east side of the house, started growling and barking at the window on the south wall of the bedroom. This was really unusual behavior for them, so we all got up to see what they were going on about. By the time we got there, the dogs had shifted their barking away from the window and seemed to be barking at the wall and along the wall, like they could smell something there. But it was moving. It was very strange, and when they came up to the end of the room, their barking just went crazy. Suddenly, from farther down the wall at the same time, about where the kitchen was, we all heard this loud thump and scuffling sound. It was powerful enough that we actually felt it, with it being an 80 by 16 trailer house and all. The dogs, at this point, just completely lost it. They cried out a high-pitched whine and just dove under the bed. We all ran out of the bedroom, down the hall, and into the kitchen to see what the heck it was up. Peering out the kitchen window was pointless, as it was late and there was cloud cover and the moon wasn't even out at this time. We heard the scuffling noise again from further down the house and went into the living room to see what was up. We were all really confused at this point. The next few moments seemed to happen in slow motion though. Appearing in the living room window from the left and looking right in on us from the glass was, I don't even know what. From the shoulders up was what I can only describe as a man dog. Its shoulders were quite human with short, sleek hair, but it had the head of what looked to be a Rottweiler. And the teeth of, oh my god, the teeth on this thing. All four of us screamed at about the same time, and I guess that scared it off because it just disappeared. That image, though, is forever seared into my head. Also, of note, this was a trailer house, so the bottom of that window was easily 6 feet off the ground, meaning that this thing was 7 foot something. And no matter how big of a dog or wolf it was, it could not have stood up and looked at us like that in the window. The guys, being guys, immediately grabbed their shotguns and headed out the door, even though I told them that it was a bad idea. Super dark desert night, big unknown critter. I guess they were out there looking around for it some 20 minutes before they came back inside and said they couldn't see anything. Figures, right? The light from the house shining on it and it being so close to the window, they were the only reasons we even saw it in the first place. None of us really slept well that night anyway. It just felt creepy. The next morning, I got up early and decided to go have a look around to see if there were any tracks to identify what the hell it was. The grass and weeds that were right beside the house pretty much hid any tracks it made there. And although I did find where it looked as if something had clawed at the siding along the bottom of the house in a couple places, making the thump and scuffling sounds the night before. I then decided to follow the tracks the guys had made, and that was when I made a second very unnerving discovery. The guys made clear tracks in the sandy dirt, and whatever it was out there did as well, because it was pretty much circling them the entire time they were out there. At a distance of about 40 feet, the tracks were huge canine and switched back and forth from 4 tracks to 2, meaning it was walking bipedally for at least half the time it circled them. Just freaking creepy to know that it was only 40 feet behind them the whole time in the dark, waiting for the right moment to pounce, and they would have never known anything. It was later in the evening when I was driving back to my in-laws' house by myself and was going down a dirt road. I saw something in the ditch up ahead on the right and didn't really know what it was until I got up far enough so that my headlights could catch it. I didn't know anything about Dogman until only a couple of years ago. This thing had an outline of a huge dog, but when I got closer, it turned and looked at me, so I just floored it. It didn't really bother me until it noticed it looking at me, and I saw that it was actually grasping what it was eating. I got back and didn't say exactly what I saw. I just asked them if there were any big dogs or wolves up where they lived. My father-in-law just laughed and said no. Then he asked why, and I didn't even say anything. The thing I will never forget are the reddish-orange eyes that just kept staring at me the entire time. While my encounter was not as up close and personal as many of your other accounts, it was nonetheless terrifying to me, and I feel that it has forever changed me and the way I view the world. I had just arrived home a few minutes after dusk and after visiting my parents. Our location is rural, but we do have a few neighborhoods within shouting distance of us. We have 33 acres of mixed forest and fields with lots of thick brush, consisting mostly of briars. I had my 2 young children with me in the Jeep, ages 2 years old and 11 months old. When I pulled in the driveway that night, my husband was working late, with an emergency case to be exact. It was near fully dark when I arrived home. As soon as I stepped from my vehicle, I felt creeped out. Something didn't feel right, it just felt different outside. We have lots of peepers and crickets that would normally be making lots of noise too. Even the birds are usually chirping until an hour or more past dark. This time, there was not a sound. It was very warm that evening, so the peepers should have been in full chorus. Because of my uneasy feeling, I was rushing to get the kids in the house, and at the same time, I did not want to leave RJ in the car alone for a minute, as I routinely do. He and our older daughter, who was asleep, are normally too heavy for me to carry together at the same time. That night, though, I grabbed them both, one in each arm, after finding my keys to the front door and carried them both. Usually, I would use the auto garage door. However, the opener did not work. When I reached the front door, at the top of the stairs and got situated on the front porch, I put down Angelina, and in order to open the front door. As soon as I turned my attention back to the front door, it happened. Somewhere to my left came a sound that will be forever seared into my memory. It started low, slowly increased to a moderately loud growl. It was deep-toned and very guttural, and was angry in character. It was nothing like anything I had ever heard before, but it did sound canine in origin, especially after spending an hour listening to various animal growls. The growl continued for approximately 10 seconds. I was so terrified, I was fumbling with the keys. It felt really like I was dropped into an 80s horror film. I really did think I was going to die. I was sure any second the thing making this sound was going to pounce upon me and the kids and eat us right there on the spot. The growl sounded as though the creature was standing just off to my left. I refused to look out of fear of what I would see. It sounded so close and at or even above eye level with me. My porch extends another 5 feet to the left, and then off the porch is the front of the house. There's 35 yards of grass to the edge of the tree line, and then there's a field with 2-foot-tall grass opposite of that. There's also a small shed between our porch and the tree line. Standing on the front porch from my head to the ground is approximately 9 feet, so I assume it was standing near the corner of the house. I had never been so afraid until a few moments later when it actually spoke to me. As the growl continued, it seemed to melt into audible words, spoken in a very deep and gruff tone that seemed to have a rough sort of reverberation quality to them. What I heard, as clear as day, was, "You can't get in." The only word that I'm unsure of is that the first "you," as the sound of growls transitioned to English words and it sounded more like "yeah." Now I was hysterical and dropping the keys. Finally, I got the right one in and got the door open and got in. I had to kick my daughter through the door regretfully. Strangely, she seemed oblivious to what had just transpired, as if she didn't even hear it. I slammed the door shut and never looked. I didn't hear anything else that night. I called my husband and his friend to let them know what happened. So I never did actually see what terrorized me because I couldn't even look. I've had 2 days to think about this encounter and talk with my husband, who has listened to many different accounts. I'm fairly certain that this was what the growling at me was, a dogman. The sound was not human and seemed like it was amped or mic'd up because it just seemed so powerful. Not that it was a loud growl, but it seemed unnaturally loud. Also, the height it seemed to emanate from and the silence that preceded it lead me to that general conclusion. My husband agrees because the entire week he too has been on edge. We have lived here for a year and all seemed normal until this week. Our cat, which is an indoor cat, got out accidentally and has vanished since, without a trace. She has gotten out before and just stood around until we got her back in the house. Also, my husband said Tuesday night he experienced the silence outside and it really unnerved him too. He says he has never experienced anything so eerie. On Wednesday, he took our dog up into the woods to look for our cat and felt very uneasy. He said the dog kept tucking its tail and turning around, wanting to go home. And it's not like our dog or my husband to feel uneasy in the woods, because both of them love the outdoors and are very comfortable in nature. On Thursday at dusk, he took the dog around the back lot and says something took off from the thickets at a sprint and came crashing through the woods down the hill towards him. He always carries a sidearm when he is out and is normally not afraid of anything, but he actually turned and ran back up towards the house. Whatever was charging stopped seconds after he stopped to listen and did not make another sound. He was very concerned when he came in, stating that he knows what big game sounds like and that this was just not right. Even he was surprised that he ran from the sound. The following day was when my encounter happened. After talking about all of these events with my husband, we are concerned that there is a Dogman in the area. My husband has listened to several different other accounts and is so worried that this thing has decided to stalk one or both of our kids. My husband said that based on those episodes and accounts, it sounds like the Dogman plans ahead when snatching kids, and he thinks it may have been scouting the area with plans to do just that. He said it was doing that or that it was waiting for me to leave one of the kids in the Jeep for a minute. My husband and I really want to believe that our conclusions are wrong, but instinct and other encounters have us highly convinced that in fact it was a Dogman. We thank you deeply for keeping these going. Impression that I was nothing and that I was weak and just food. I got the impression that it was just saying, can't get in, haha, you're mine. It's really hard to explain because it seemed like I was just conveying its frame of mind that it was, for lack of better description, making fun of me in a very cruel way. I really want to know if you have ever heard of one of these monsters actually speaking.